I'm Chaplain Peter Fischer, the Wing Chaplain. I've got several of my team here that I'm introducing a little bit. And we're going to talk about spiritual resiliency because in the CAP program, commanders are responsible for developing you professionally and personally. And the way they develop you personally is through the CAP, the three pillars or the three domains of CAP. Now, I'm not going to embarrass you and ask you to repeat them, but I'm going to give you a little hint of how I remember them. I think of MPS squared. MPS squared. Mental, physical, social, and spiritual. You can remember that, right? So over the past couple of years, we've heard lots of briefings on mental resiliency. We've had a lot of briefings about suicide prevention, suicide awareness. Physically, let's face it, you get tested at least once a year if you do well enough, or else twice a year for PT. We've got IMR, you're getting your immunization shots, your dental. It's clear that the military is concerned about your physical health. Socially, we have banquets and balls. We do key spouse programs. I just did Tinseltown. We're always trying to make sure that you're socially active and involved. But spiritually, we kind of leave that up to you personally. And the Chaplain Corps is here to help you with that. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time focusing on that. But if you're wondering what is spiritual resiliency, you're not alone. Next slide, please. Now, this is going to be a challenge, but I've got here two airmen with a big A that I brought with me to help to illustrate as you read what resiliency is. And I know it's kind of a big auditorium, but you can kind of see here they sort of look alike. This one's a little bit bigger airman than this one, right? They're both black and white. They kind of look similar, and you probably can't see from the back, but this one's sort of spiky. This looks like that rude, crude, tattooed guy that you don't want to meet in a dark alley. This one's a little bit more refined. But these two airmen are about to meet the same fate. Each of these airmen are about to meet a difficult, hard situation. It might be a financially tight situation. They might be facing bankruptcy. Maybe it's a relationship issue. They're getting ready to face an unpleasant divorce. Maybe it's a health concern that they themselves blew out a knee or a family member is in the hospital. Whatever it is, they're about to face something difficult, but the response is going to be very different. This airman here is going to be thrown quickly at that hard situation right there, which is the floor. Of course, what does he do? You can interact. This is okay. It's kind of like church, amen. He bounces back. And not only does he bounce back, he may even come back higher than what he started. This airman here is going to face the exact same difficult situation. And what do you think is going to happen? You guessed it, right? He stopped right there. And the difference between these two airmen is what's inside. What's inside. This airman here is not only strong, but also extremely flexible. I remember when I was some former Army and I was at the 82nd, it was an NCO that came up to me and I said, you got to stay flexible. You got to stay flexible. He said, no, Chaplain, you're wrong. Around here, flexibility is too rigid. You have to stay fluid. So this airman is flexible and fluid. This airman absorbs everything. When this airman hits something hard, hits a brick wall, he takes it all in. He absorbs it all and does nothing with it. This airman responds by taking that negative event and turning it into something positive. I don't know if you know this, but if you've ever met any Alcoholics Anonymous counselors, almost all of them are alcoholics themselves. They took a negative situation in their lives and they turned it into something positive. If you talk to most counselors, usually they've been through some difficult things. They've taken a negative situation and they've turned it positive. So when we talk about resiliency, we want you to be able to bounce back from hard times. We want you to be this airman that is strong and flexible inside. So I've got a few definitions up there, but I wanted to read something other than what you can read yourselves. And this comes from a former talking point on spiritual fitness, and I thought it was pretty important. It talked about spiritual fitness or spiritual resiliency is key to an individual, just as esprit de corps is vital to a unit. That was a great comparison. If your unit has esprit de corps, you can do more than another unit with the exact same number of people, the exact same equipment. And the same way as an individual, if you have a strong spirit, you can do more than a similar individual who has a weak spirit. Next slide, please. Now, what I've got here are three different plants. And these plants are each dealing with incredibly harsh situations, and yet they've adapted their own unique ways. The first one is the beba tree. And the beba tree grows in places like Australia, Africa, Arabia. As you guess, these are pretty dry, harsh climates. And they only get rain in some of these places 1 or 2 months out of the year. This tree can get as high as 100 feet tall and 36 feet across. In fact, there's one of these in South Africa that a lot of them are hollow inside, that they've made a bar inside the base of the tree. And these trees during the rainy season can absorb up to 30,000 gallons of water. It's like a huge camel sucking in water during the month or two of rain. And then when the winter months come, all those leaves drop off and it looks dead. It's nicknamed the upside down tree because it looks like you've just ripped a tree up, flipped it around, popped it in the ground with the roots stuck up in the air. And when the rain comes, it's exhausted its resources, and the green leaves come back as the new rain, and it sucks up, and it's ready again for the next season. Very creative, resilient way to deal with a situation where no other trees can grow. The next plant in the middle is a little flower. It's called the Edelweiss. You've probably heard of that. It's the same family as the daisy family or as a sunflower. This grows at altitudes from 5,000 to 10,000 feet in Europe in the Alps. There's a special forces group that has used this as their emblem because it's such a tough little plant. You don't usually think of the Edelweiss flower as a tough plant, but it actually is. It deals with incredibly high doses of ultraviolet radiation, deep, dark, cold nights, bitter cold winds, and it's covered with this stuff that looks like wool that protects it and keeps it safe. It's adapted its own way to deal with those harsh climates where no other plants can grow. And finally, the last one is the lone cypress. Anybody here from California? Have you heard of the lone cypress? I'd never heard of it until I was preparing for this. The lone cypress is a tree that's over 250 years old. This tree was born, or growing, whatever you want to call it, planted before our Declaration of Independence was signed. This tree has survived numerous floods. It's survived all kinds of fires. It's had everything you can imagine, tourism, everything. And the reason it survived, if you can see, there's a little wall, retaining wall around it. It didn't do it alone. There's some people that really cared about this tree. They built that retaining wall. Every time a fire comes through, they set up a fire brigade, and they put out the fire before it gets close to the tree. It's been bent over, and they propped it up and roped it up. This tree is resilient and survived for 250 years because it's gotten help. I think you're getting the picture here, right? There's more than one way to be resilient. Next slide, please. So the RAND Corporation, you've probably heard of them before, maybe you haven't. The government uses them for a lot of different studies they've done, some studies on resiliency to include spiritual resiliency. And they have looked at factors that make airmen, soldiers, sailors, Marines resilient. And they found all kinds of lists, and they've whittled these lists down, and they've interviewed and talked to people, and come down to these 6 categories that make us resilient. The first one, positive outlook. I want to talk just a little bit about this. This isn't necessarily just spiritual resiliency. This is any kind of resiliency. And I'd like to tell you about the situation that everything you encounter in life you're going to find. Every relationship, every job, every PCS, you're going to find 2 things. You're going to find a pile of gold and a pile of manure, right? Got some enlisted folks in here, right? I'm prior enlisted. And when I went to the recruiter, what did the recruiter show me? A pile of gold, right? Here's all the benefits. The GI Bill. You can travel. Great medical, right? You're going to get respect. You'll get in shape. And when you showed up at basic training, what did you see? A pile of manure, right? You're getting yelled at. You're getting thrown in a room full of people that you can't stand. Oh, I know, you loved all your teammates there, right? And the same thing in a relationship. When you're dating, what is it? Put on the nicest clothes, put on the cologne, all that stuff, be all friendly and everything. And then when the relationship progresses, sometimes you see the manure, right? Same thing with your jobs. Every situation in life has a pile of gold and a pile of manure. But I want to tell you something that I've learned over the years. When I was stationed at RF Alconbury, in England, they have these ginormous roses. Now, I like flowers and plants, you can tell from my illustration there, but these were the biggest, best smelling roses I'd ever seen. We were renting the place, and I wanted to make sure I could keep them alive. So I did all kinds of research, and do you know what the best fertilizer is for roses? Well-rotted horse manure. Why well-rotted? I don't know. Well-rotted horse manure. And I began to learn something. That in life, when you are handed a pile of manure, plant rose seeds, water it, and watch it be transformed into something beautiful. You watch, and the worst situations in your life can actually be transformed into something fantastic over time. And that's where spiritual resiliency comes in. spiritual resiliency. Active coping. Active coping is where you are able to take care of things in a positive way. It doesn't mean that you ignore negative things in life. It's like this floor. Negative things are going to happen. If you live more than a few years, something difficult is going to come at you. What this active coping means is that you do something positive with it. Just like that ball that bounces back. It initially absorbs the energy and then redirects it in a positive direction, as opposed to that hacky sack that just absorbed it and held it and did nothing with it. If you just take that rough stuff in your life and you hold on to it and you do nothing with it, it's not going to help you. Active coping. The next one is self-confidence. Now, I don't know if you realize this, and I know I'm talking a lot about enlisted, but I think it's 85% or more of our force is enlisted, so I think the officers can understand. But when you walk into the recruiter's office, do you know that 70% of the people that walk through that door are disqualified for one reason or another? So if you made it past the recruiter to the MEP Center, or whatever they call it these days, that was a lot of years ago, and you signed a contract, you're in the top 30%. When you made it through basic training and your tech school, you just took on another notch. Do you know that in America, less than 7.3% of the population has ever served in any branch of the military ever? Now, I personally think that the military are the best people on the planet, the United States military. I'm convinced of that. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been on my 37th year now serving with you, right? You are in the top 10%. Oh yeah, and by the way, only 0.4% are on active duty, and of those, less than a quarter are Air Force. Self-confidence should be easier for you. In my mind, you're in the top 99.99% of this country. Remember when you first got that uniform, how you held your head high, shoulders back a little bit? Self-confidence should be easy for this crowd, no matter what hits you. That should be an easy one. The next one that we talk about is learning and making meaning. Again, talking about taking that manure and turning it into something positive. You are going to have hard and difficult things happen to you. We all do. But it's what you do with them that really determines who you are. Number 5, acceptable limits. Remember the cypress tree? Sometimes you can't do it on your own. Sometimes you need a helping hand. Anybody seen those narrow gauge railroad tracks? Now safety, please, this is an abandoned set of tracks. There are no trains on this track, all right? And I know you walked on railroad tracks, right? And when you walk alone on a railroad track, you can go a pretty decent distance. But if there's a strong wind, or you get distracted, or something happens, or your ankle twists, you're going to go down. But if you're on a narrow set of tracks, and you got a friend, and you put your hand on their shoulder, and they put your hand on yours, and you walk on those rails together, guess what? You can walk forever. I don't know if you've ever done that. If you try that on an abandoned set of tracks, it works. And the point is, sometimes walking alone is just too hard. Sometimes in life you need somebody that can put an arm around you and walk with you, like that cypress tree. That cypress tree couldn't put out the fires by itself. It couldn't keep the floods away by itself. It needed help, and there's nothing wrong with asking for help. Finally, spirituality. Now, I know there's some people in this audience that say, I'm not spiritual. Well, do you have a purpose for your life? Do you have meaning? Do you have values? Do you have morals? Because if you have any of those things, they come from your spirituality. They come from the ultimate questions of life. Why am I here? What am I doing here? What is my purpose? That comes from your place of spirituality. So everybody has some sense of spirituality, and for a lot of us, that's a faith community. I can't tell you as a chaplain how many times I've had people tell me, well, I'm not going to church, I'm not going to synagogue, I'm not going to mosque, because it's full of hypocrites, right? So I asked them this simple question, do you have any hypocrites at work? They go, yes, I do. I said, I wouldn't go there. Well, I'd stay away from there. You got any hypocrites in your family? Don't go home for Christmas, please. Don't go home for holidays. Stay away, right? And if you think that the roof's going to cave in, when you walk in, trust me, it ain't. A lot of us on my team and a lot of our folks, we're all in the same place. It's kind of like saying I can't go to the hospital because I'm sick. Like, that's why you go to the hospital. I can't go to church or synagogue or to a faith community because I'm not where I should be. Well, that's exactly why you should go. That's exactly why you should go. And if you notice on that first slide, it said if you practice your spiritual resiliency, you'll be stronger. So next slide, I want you to take a quick look at this one. And I stole this from the Navy, shamelessly. Yep, I thought it was a pretty good product. And if you read through these and find yourself relating to those in the green and the yellow, you're probably okay spiritually. But if you find yourself saying, and I can really relate to that orange and red, then you might want to find somebody to walk on those tracks with you. And I want you to know that you do not have to journey alone. I know that you're a long ways away from home, most of us are, and you might think that there's nobody here that cares. And that's part of why I'm here today, is to tell you that myself, me and my team, we care. If nobody's told you that they care about you, let me tell you, I'm telling you that right now. I got grandkids back home. I could be doing a lot of other things other than sitting on a little island in the Pacific. I'm here to take care of you guys, and my team is as well. And sir, if I'm not taking too much time, I'd like to just take a minute to introduce some of my team, because I want you to understand that chaplains have been there as well, and chaplain's assistant. Chaplain Pakar, rabbi here, turn around. He spent 6 years before he got here as a mental health counselor, 2 of those working with addicts. If you're struggling with any kind of addiction, pornography, drugs, alcohol, whatever, he's been there. He's worked with these folks. Thank you. We got Chaplain Tafuna here. Was an NCAA fullback of the division. He said the only reason he made it through all those practices, all that grueling physical pain, was because he was going to church every week. If you've got physical conditions and not quite sure how to overcome them, or if you just want to talk sports, here's your guy. Sit down. Father Wynn, this is a really interesting story. This guy, only us old farts in the front row will remember this. 1975 was a pretty big year for the United States because we pulled out of Vietnam. And at that time, there was a North and a South Vietnam. Go ahead and stand up, Father Wynn. And this guy was 5 years old. I know I just dimed you out of your age. Go ahead and turn around. He was one of the Vietnamese boat people. He told me that his family was wealthy enough to have boats, so they took their boat, loaded the family on it, and headed out towards this big black ship on the sea, which was an aircraft carrier. But of course, they wouldn't pick him up because they weren't in distress. So what does father do? Lit his own boat on fire with his family on it. He was rescued, became a refugee, and here he is today. He's lived a little bit. Chaplain Rhodes. This guy here, 15 years prior enlisted in the Air Force. Helicopter maintainer. Now here for the HMU, right? Oh, you gotta have somebody from the HMU here, right? Not only that, when he was enlisted, he had a bout with depression. Knows a little bit about struggling with dark place. Didn't have the happiest upbringing either. So if you come from an abusive home, this guy can relate. Go ahead and sit down. And we got Chaplain Creech here. Powerful story. Prior Navy, enlisted and officer. At the 15-year mark as a chaplain in the Navy, they said, thank you very much. Here's your pink slip. We don't need you. 5 years away from retirement, right? This chaplain at that time had suicidal thoughts. In fact, there was, in my opinion, in his words, a divine intervention that kept him alive to serve with us today. Fantastic dad, father, chaplain. If you think we can't relate, we can relate. Go ahead and sit down. And then my superintendent here, Master Sergeant McCurdy. This gentleman here will tell you a story about the brutality of his father. He had 3 broken ribs and a broken collarbone at one point in his upbringing. He's now an E7 in the Air Force. Go ahead and sit down. My mom has been married 6 times. I went through a divorce on active duty as a chaplain. I'm now a step-parent, wonderful marriage of 12 years. I could go on and on. What is my point? Every one of these leaders, every one of your NCO leaders has been through something difficult. The only reason they're still in and they've done well is because they're resilient and their strength comes from a very private space. But don't ever think that somebody can't relate to you and doesn't know what you're going through. And please don't ever walk alone. Next slide. We will walk with you, me, my team, we'll find somebody to walk with you.